The Atlantic Ocean is a 3,000-mile-wide chemical desert that consumes carbon-based life with mechanical precision. In the mid-1400s, the boundary between your lungs and a saltwater grave is a 2-inch thick slab of green oak, increasingly saturated with brine and structural fatigue. You are not an explorer. You are a biological component trapped inside a failing machine. The 15th century Caravel is a cramped, leaking wooden box held together by animal glue, iron that begins to oxidize the moment it touches the spray, and the desperate friction of hempen ropes. To understand why you will not survive this journey, you must first understand the physics of your coffin. The Caravel, specifically the Caravella latina, was an evolution of Mediterranean fishing vessels, never intended for the vertical displacement and kinetic energy of the open Atlantic. It is a vessel of compromise, designed to prioritize speed and maneuverability at the total expense of human habitability and structural safety. The construction of a caravel begins with the selection of the keel, the backbone of the entire anatomical structure. In the shipyards of Lisbon or Lagos, shipwrights seek a single, straight timber of oak or elm. But this wood is green. It has not been seasoned for years to allow the cellular structure to stabilize. It contains residual sap and moisture that will, within weeks of entering the high salinity environment of the Atlantic, begin a process of internal fermentation and rot. This is the first failure point. As the ship hits the massive, rolling swells of the open ocean, waves that can reach heights of 30 feet and exert several tons of pressure per square foot, the keel is subjected to immense torsional stress. It twists along its longitudinal axis. It groans as the scarf joints, where the timbers are spliced together, begin to slip. And as it twists, the ribs attached to it, the futtocks, begin to pull away from their fastenings. In the 1400s, these fastenings are primarily tree nails, wooden pegs made of dried oak, driven through the hull and wedged at the ends. When the ship is dry, they hold. When the ship is perpetually wet, the green wood of the hull and the seasoned wood of the tree nails swell at different rates. The tree nails begin to work themselves loose, turning the hull into a shifting, flexible cage rather than a rigid shield. Every wave that hits the bow sends a shock wave through the entire frame, a mechanical vibration that slowly shears the wooden pins. You are breathing the air inside this cage, and it is toxic. Below the deck boards lies the bilge, the lowest point of the hull where the sweet water of the sea meets the waste of the crew and the livestock. Because 15th century hulls are never truly watertight, the ship must be pumped constantly using a primitive elm tree pump, a hollowed-out log with a leather valve that frequently clogs with hair and debris. The bilge water is a slurry of seawater, rotting grain, rat droppings, and the blood of slaughtered animals. It stagnates in the heat of the lower latitudes, creating a concentrated sulfuric miasma, primarily hydrogen sulfide and methane. The smell is more than a nuisance. It is a physical weight that coats your throat and lungs, leading to chronic respiratory inflammation. This liquid eats at the very oakum used to caulk the seams. Caulking is the process of taking old, tar-soaked hemp fibers and hammering them into the gaps between the exterior planks using a caulking iron and a heavy mallet. To seal these gaps, the shipwrights apply a thick layer of pitch or gala-gala, a mixture of animal fat, lime, and resin. Under the relentless pounding of the Atlantic, this sealant cracks. The salt crystals work their way into the fissures like microscopic wedges, expanding and contracting with the temperature, slowly prying the ship apart from the outside in. The mechanical disadvantage of the Caravel is exacerbated by its weight distribution. These ships are top-heavy, featuring high castles at the stern designed for defense but disastrous for stability. When a gale hits, the wind catches these wooden towers, creating a lever effect that threatens to capsize the vessel. You are constantly living on a slant, your inner ear perpetually assaulted by the lack of a true horizontal plane. The deck beneath your feet is coated in a mixture of salt spray and fish oil, making every step a gamble against a shattered femur. There are no railings to catch you. If you go over the side, the ship, running before the wind with its lateen sails, cannot turn back. The physics of 15th century rigging do not allow for a quick, man-overboard maneuver. You will float in the cold, high-salinity water, watching the wooden silhouette of your home disappear into the gray mist, until hypothermia shuts down your cardiac rhythm. Even the iron used in the ship's few metal components is a liability. The 15th century has not mastered the art of high-quality steel or corrosion-resistant alloys. The bolts holding the rudder gudgeons are made of wrought iron, filled with slag and impurities. As the salt water penetrates the wood and reaches the metal, galvanic corrosion begins. The iron expands as it rusts, exerting thousands of pounds of pressure per square inch on the surrounding timber. This iron sickness causes the wood to soften and rot around the bolt holes. You are sailing in a vessel that is literally dissolving at its joints. Every creak of the hull is the sound of a structural failure in progress. The rigging itself, the miles of hemp rope that control the sails, is a living, rotting organism. Hemp is highly absorbent. It sucks in the moisture of the Atlantic fogs, increasing its weight by 30% and losing its tensile strength. A sudden gust of wind doesn't just pull the rope, it snaps the degraded fibers, sending the heavy yardarms crashing down onto the deck. The final insult of the Caravel's design is its lack of internal volume. You are packed into a space shared with 70 other men, crates of salt-cured pork, and barrels of water that have already begun to grow a film of green algae. There is no privacy, no sanitation, and no escape from the mechanical vibration of the sea hitting the hull. The ship is a drum, and the Atlantic is the drummer. You can hear the water rushing past just inches from your head as you try to sleep on the hard, damp deck. You can hear the wood splintering under the weight of the water. This is the machine that is supposed to carry you across the world, but it was never designed for the scale of this ocean. It was designed for the Mediterranean and the coastal waters of Africa, shallow, predictable, and forgiving. The Atlantic is an abyss that demands a level of structural integrity the 1400s simply cannot engineer. A heavy gust catches the mainsail. The hemp stays scream under the tension, and a single, rusted iron bolt shears off with the sound of a pistol shot. The Atlantic Ocean operates as a planetary-scale heat engine, and your life is the fuel it consumes. If you survive the initial structural degradation of the Caravel's hull, you are immediately confronted by the invisible fluid dynamics of the North Atlantic gyre. In the 15th century, this is not a map. It is a one-way conveyor belt of air and water known as the trade winds. These winds are the result of intense solar radiation at the equator, creating a low-pressure zone, which sucks in cooler, denser air from the subtropics. For a caravel, this means you are being pushed westward at a constant, unrelenting speed of 15 to 20 knots. The physics are simple. Once you enter this stream, the aerodynamic drag on your square-rigged sails makes a return journey impossible. You are locked into a trajectory determined by the barometric gradient of the planet. To turn back against these winds with the primitive rigging of the 1400s is a mechanical impossibility. The ship lacks the ability to sail close to the wind, and the lateral resistance of the shallow keel is insufficient to prevent massive leeway. You are not sailing. You are being discarded by the continent. As you move further into the Mar Tenebroso, or the Sea of Darkness, the atmospheric pressure begins to stabilize, and the wind, which was once your only means of propulsion, vanishes. You have entered the horse latitudes, a high-pressure dead zone where the air is heavy, hot, and stagnant. Here, the Atlantic reveals its most effective killing mechanism, the Sargasso Sea. This is a 2 million square mile vortex of slow-moving water, choked with sargassum, a holopelagic brown alga that survives and reproduces while floating on the surface. To the mechanical operation of a 15th century vessel, this weed is a physical brake. It wraps around the rudder, clogs the intake of the bilge pumps, and increases the surface friction against the hull. The ship slows to a crawl, then stops. The silence is absolute, broken only by the rhythmic slapping of the slack canvas against the masts. The sun becomes a weapon. The temperature on the wooden deck rises to over 110 degrees Fahrenheit. The pitch used to seal the deck seams, the paying of the deck, begins to melt and bubble. It sticks to your bare feet, tearing away the skin as you move. The biological cost of this stagnation is calculated in liters of water. Your body requires a minimum of 2 liters of water per day to maintain basic metabolic function in this heat. The wooden barrels in the hold, however, are failing. These barrels, or pipes, are made of oak staves held together by iron or willow hoops. Because they are stored in the humid, salt-saturated environment of the hold, the wood undergoes constant expansion and contraction. The sweet water inside begins to leak out through the microscopic gaps in the staves, while the bacteria-laden bilge water seeps in. Within 2 weeks of entering the Sargasso, the water in your barrel has turned a translucent green. It is thick with the mucus-like secretions of algae and the waste products of anaerobic bacteria. When you drink it, the high concentration of nitrates and sulfur compounds causes immediate gastrointestinal distress. Your body begins to expel more fluid through diarrhea than you are taking in. Dehydration sets in, thickening your blood and increasing the workload on your heart. Your kidneys begin to fail, unable to process the increasing concentration of salt in your system. The sensory reality of the Sargasso is the smell of rotting biomass. The Sargassum weed, trapped in the windless heat, begins to decompose on the surface of the ocean, releasing hydrogen sulfide gas. This gas smells of concentrated rot and sulfur. It tarnishes the few silver coins you have hidden in your rags and irritates the mucosal membranes of your eyes and nose. Your skin, perpetually crusted with salt from the evaporating spray, begins to develop sea boils, painful, infected lesions caused by the friction of salt-stiffened clothing against sweat-softened flesh. There is no shade. The high-altitude sun pierces the thin atmosphere, causing second-degree burns on your neck and shoulders. The skin blisters, the blisters pop, and the salt air prevents the wounds from scabbing. You are a living, open sore, trapped on a motionless wooden platform in the center of a desert made of water. The mechanical failure of the ship continues even in the calm. The dead swell, massive, slow-moving undulations of water generated by distant storms, causes the ship to roll violently from side to side. Without the stabilizing force of the wind in the sails, the Caravel becomes a pendulum. This is known as rolling the masts out of the ship. The lateral forces on the shrouds and stays, the ropes that support the masts, are immense. Each time the ship rolls, the weight of the heavy wooden masts and the cross-shaped yards yanks on the hempen lines. The chainplates, the iron fittings that anchor these lines to the hull, are subjected to metal fatigue. You can hear the iron groaning, the sound of crystalline structures within the metal snapping under the tension. If a chainplate fails, the mast will snap like a dry twig, crashing down and crushing anyone on deck. The ship's center of gravity is too high, and the ballast in the hold, rounded river stones, shifts with every roll. As the stones slide to one side, the ship takes on a permanent list, further reducing its stability. You crawl across the deck, your fingers gripping the splintering wood, as the horizon disappears behind a wall of weed. The last of the breeze flickers out, and the sails go limp. The Atlantic swell is not a singular event. It is a sequence of kinetic energy transfers that your 15th-century vessel was never engineered to absorb. The primary structural threat is a phenomenon known as hogging and sagging. This occurs when the length of the ocean wave matches or exceeds the length of the ship's hull. In the Atlantic, the wave period is significantly longer than in the Mediterranean. When the Caravel is perched on the crest of a massive wave, the bow and stern are suspended in the air while the midsection is supported by the water. This is hogging. The entire weight of the ship, the cannons, the barrels, the crew, exerts a downward force on the ends of the keel, attempting to snap it upward in the middle like a piece of kindling. The internal timbers, the stringers and clamps that run the length of the hull, are compressed until the wood fibers actually crush against one another. You can hear the sound of the ship's skeleton screaming, a deep, resonant thudding of oak against oak as the joints are forced beyond their mechanical limits. Seconds later, the ship slides into the trough between waves. Now, the bow and stern are buried in the water while the midsection hangs over the void. This is sagging. The forces are reversed. The keel is now being pulled downward in the center while the ends are pushed upward. This rapid, rhythmic alternation between hogging and sagging creates a working of the hull. Every plank in the ship is moving independently. The pitch and oakum that were hammered into the seams are squeezed out like toothpaste. The hull is no longer a solid object. It is a loose collection of boards held together by friction and hope. As you lie on the deck, you can feel the wood beneath you shifting. You can see the gaps between the planks opening and closing, letting in rhythmic spurts of pressurized seawater. This water isn't just leaking. It is being pumped into the ship by the very motion of the waves. The tactile experience of this structural failure is one of constant, vibrating grit. As the timbers rub together, they create a fine sawdust that mixes with the salt spray and the grease from the rigging. This abrasive paste covers everything. It gets into your eyes, under your fingernails, and into your food. Your hardtack, the flour and water biscuit that is your primary source of calories, is already nearly ineatable. It has been baked twice to remove all moisture, making it as hard as a ceramic tile. To eat it, you must bang it against the deck to knock out the weevils, the Cytophilus granarius, which have colonized the biscuit. These beetles thrive in the damp heat of the hold, laying eggs that hatch into larvae that tunnel through the starch. You soak the biscuit in your ration of foul water or wine, but the grit from the working hull has already settled into it. Every bite is a mixture of fermented grain, insect protein, and pulverized oak. The mechanical stress on the ship is mirrored by the mechanical stress on your skeletal system. Because the ship is constantly accelerating and decelerating as it climbs and descends the waves, your muscles are in a state of permanent contraction to maintain balance. This leads to rapid ATP depletion and extreme physical exhaustion. There is no place to rest where the motion is neutralized. The motion sickness you experience is a sensory conflict between your vestibular system and your visual field, but in the 1400s, there is no treatment. Your body attempts to purge your stomach contents, but there is nothing left but bile. The constant vomiting leads to further electrolyte imbalance, specifically a loss of potassium and sodium. This triggers muscle cramps, Charlie horses, that are so violent they can tear the muscle fibers or pull tendons from the bone. You are physically dissolving at the same rate as the ship. Navigation in this environment is a form of mathematical suicide. To determine your position, you use a quadrant or a primitive mariner's astrolabe to measure the angle of the North Star, Polaris, above the horizon. But on a sagging, hogging caravel in the middle of a 30-foot swell, the horizon is a moving target. The weighted plumb line of the quadrant swings wildly with the motion of the ship. You are trying to measure a fraction of a degree while being tossed like a leaf in a storm. A measurement error of just 1 degree, the width of your pinky finger at arm's length, results in a positional error of 60 nautical miles. Over a 30-day voyage, these errors compound. You are not where you think you are. You are drifting into a dead zone where the currents do not lead to land, but back into the center of the gyre. The final mechanical failure of the hull often comes not from a single wave, but from the cumulative effect of harmonic resonance. Every structure has a natural frequency at which it vibrates. If the frequency of the waves hits the resonant frequency of the caravel's hull, the vibrations amplify. The ship begins to shake with a violence that defies its wooden construction. This vibration shears the knees, the L-shaped wooden braces that hold the decks to the hull. Without these braces, the decks lose their structural integrity and begin to collapse onto the hold below. You hear a sound like a forest breaking in a hurricane. A massive, rogue swell, born from a storm 1,000 miles to the north, looms over the stern. It is a wall of dark, high-salinity water, moving at 30 miles per hour. It hits the stern castle with the force of a falling building. The wooden transom, the flat back of the ship, shatters. The Atlantic enters the ship not as a leak, but as a solid piston of water. The hull shears. Your survival on the Atlantic is dictated by the integrity of the pipe, the massive 500-liter oak cask used for water storage. In the 15th century, the science of microbiology does not exist, but its effects are absolute. To understand why your body will fail, you must first understand the mechanical failure of water preservation. The casks are manufactured by a cooper, using seasoned oak staves that are bent into shape over a fire. These staves are held under tension by iron or willow hoops. However, once these casks are lowered into the damp, dark environment of the hold, they become an ideal incubator for anaerobic bacteria. The sweet water taken from the Tagus or the Guadalquivir is not sterile. It is a complex soup of organic matter, minerals, and microbial life. Within 10 days of departure, the lack of UV light and the constant agitation of the ship's motion trigger a catastrophic chemical shift. The oxygen within the barrel is rapidly depleted by aerobic bacteria, giving way to anaerobic fermentation. A technical system of the era is the curing of the cask, where the interior is sometimes charred with fire to create a layer of carbon intended to filter the water. This is a mechanical fallacy. The carbon layer merely provides a more porous surface area for the formation of biofilms, slimy, multicellular matrices of Pseudomonas and Flavobacterium. These biofilms trap sediment and waste, creating a concentrated sludge at the bottom of the barrel. When you insert a wooden ladle to draw your daily ration, you are disturbing this sediment. The water you drink is no longer $H_20. It is a suspension of bacterial waste and decomposing with tannins. The smell is the first sensory trigger, a sharp, metallic odor of hydrogen sulfide, the same gas found in sewers. It tastes of wet earth and copper. As you swallow, the high concentration of nitrates begins to irritate your esophageal lining, causing a persistent, dry cough that will eventually lead to the rupture of small capillaries in your throat. Simultaneously, the hardtack, or ship's biscuit, your primary caloric source, undergoes its own biological transformation. Hardtack is a technical solution to the problem of food spoilage, a mixture of flour and water, baked twice at low temperatures to achieve a moisture content of less than 5%. In theory, this should make it shelf-stable for years. In the reality of the Atlantic, the high humidity of the hold makes dry an impossibility. The biscuit absorbs the moisture from the salt-laden air, increasing its water activity to a level where the Cytophilus granarius, or the granary weevil, can thrive. The life cycle of the weevil is a masterpiece of efficiency. The female bores a microscopic hole into the starch of the biscuit, deposits an egg, and seals it with a gelatinous secretion. You cannot see the infestation until the larvae have already consumed the interior of the biscuit, leaving behind a hollow, brittle shell filled with frass, a polite term for insect excrement. When you bite into the biscuit, the sound is not a clean snap, but a dull, sandy crunch. The tactile grit of the frass against your teeth is inescapable. This is more than a disgust response. It is a nutritional deficit. The weevils are consuming the complex carbohydrates and B vitamins your body desperately needs to maintain cellular repair. To compensate, the 15th century diet relies on salt junk, beef or pork that has been cured in a high-density brine. The technical process involves corning the meat, where large grains of salt, the size of corn, are rubbed into the flesh to draw out moisture through osmotic pressure. This creates an environment where the salt concentration is so high that most spoilage bacteria cannot survive. However, the fat in the meat is not protected by the salt. Over weeks of exposure to the heat of the lower latitudes, the fats undergo oxidative rancidity. The long-chain fatty acids break down into short-chain aldehydes and ketones. The meat turns a sickly, translucent yellow and develops a flavor like old soap and ammonia. As your body processes this high-sodium, rancid fuel, your blood chemistry begins to shift. The excessive salt intake forces your kidneys into overdrive, attempting to filter the sodium ions from your plasma. But because your water intake is limited to the bacterial slurry of the barrels, you are in a state of permanent hypernatremia. This causes water to be drawn out of your cells and into your bloodstream to balance the concentration. Your cells literally shrivel. Your skin becomes inelastic. If you pinch it, the tint of skin remains for seconds before slowly flattening. Your brain, sensitive to these shifts in electrolyte balance, begins to swell slightly as it tries to pull moisture back from the blood. This results in mariner's fog, a state of lethargy, irritability, and decreased cognitive function. You find yourself staring at the horizon, unable to remember the last command given by the bosun. The ship's physical decay is now mirrored in your own cellular breakdown. The sanitation on board is non-existent, adding a layer of fecal-oral contamination to the biological collapse. The head of the ship is a simple wooden platform at the bow with a hole cut into it, suspended over the churning Atlantic. In a heavy swell, using this facility is a mechanical challenge that often results in the user being drenched in their own waste or thrown into the sea. Most of the crew avoids this risk, opting to use buckets in the hold. These buckets are frequently knocked over as the ship hogs and sags, sending a stream of raw sewage into the bilge. This waste is aerosolized by the motion of the ship, meaning you are literally breathing the pathogens of your crewmates. The cycle of infection is closed. You take a piece of the yellowed, rancid pork, find it covered in a thin, iridescent film of bacterial growth, and, driven by a hunger that overrides your survival instinct, you force the putrid meat into your mouth. The hold of a 15th-century Caravel is an enclosed ecosystem governed by the laws of decay. Below the waterline, the temperature remains a constant, humid 80 degrees Fahrenheit, the perfect breeding ground for the ratus or the black rat. These are not merely pests. They are biological competitors for your very survival. A single pair of rats can produce up to 5 litters a year, and on a voyage across the Atlantic, their population explodes geometrically. They are the apex predators of the hold, capable of gnawing through the lead lining of the bread rooms and the thick hempen bags containing the dried peas. But their impact is more than caloric theft. The rats carry the Xenocilla chiopes, the oriental rat flea, which is the primary vector for Yersinia pestis. While the Black Death is a century in the past, the ship fever that haunts these vessels is often a variant of typhus, transmitted by the lice and fleas that thrive in the unwashed wool of your clothing. You have not changed your clothes since you left the port of Lagos. Your wool tunic is now a stiff, salt-encrusted carapace, impregnated with the oils of your skin and the soot from the ship's galley. This fabric is the habitat for the Pediculus humanus, the human body louse. The louse does not live on your skin, but in the seams of your clothing, emerging only to feed on your blood. The technical reality of 15th-century hygiene is that there is no soap capable of emulsifying the salt and grease on your body. You wash in the spray of the Atlantic, which only serves to deposit more salt crystals into the fibers of your tunic. These crystals act as microscopic abrasives, chafing your skin until it is raw and weeping. The lice thrive in these open sores. The sensation is a constant, crawling itch that prevents deep sleep, leading to a state of chronic sleep deprivation that further compromises your immune system. The bilge water, the toxic slurry at the bottom of the hull, is the mechanical heart of this biological collapse. Because the ship is made of wood, it is never truly sealed. Seawater constantly seeps through the garboard strake, the plank closest to the keel. This water mixes with everything that falls through the deck boards: hair, skin cells, food scraps, and the urine of 70 men. This mixture undergoes a process of anaerobic digestion, producing a concentrated sludge known as bilge muck. To remove it, the crew must operate the elm tree pump, a primitive vacuum system consisting of a hollowed log and a leather piston. The mechanical failure of the pump occurs when the leather valve, dried by the salt and rot, cracks and loses its suction. When this happens, you must descend into the bilge to clear the obstruction. The sensory reality of the bilge is a physical assault. The air is so thick with ammonia and methane that your eyes immediately begin to stream with tears. The tactile sensation is one of wading through a cold, oily gelatin. As you reach into the muck to clear the pump intake, your hand brushes against something solid, the bloated, waterlogged carcass of a rat that has drowned in the slurry. The smell is a visceral, cloying sweetness of putrefaction that clings to your skin for days. You are not just cleaning a machine. You are immersing yourself in a concentrated bath of Salmonella, E. coli, and Shigella. If you have even the smallest cut on your hand, a splinter from the oak hull or a scratch from a weevil-infested biscuit, the bacteria enter your bloodstream instantly. Within hours, the site of the infection turns a dark, angry purple. This is the bilge rot, a localized gangrene that, without antibiotics, will spread up your arm, turning the lymph nodes in your armpit into hard, painful buboes. The physics of the ship's ventilation system, or the lack thereof, exacerbates the biological load. The only source of fresh air in the hold is the main hatchway, which must be battened down during heavy weather to prevent the ship from foundering. When the hatch is closed, the oxygen level in the hold drops while the carbon dioxide and methane levels rise. This bad air, or miasma, was thought by 15th-century physicians to be the cause of disease. They were partially right, but for the wrong reasons. The lack of air circulation allows for the concentration of fungal spores. The damp wood of the hull is colonized by Serpula lacrimans, the dry rot fungus, which consumes the cellulose and lignin in the oak. The spores are invisible, but as you breathe them in, they settle in the moist environment of your lungs, causing a fungal pneumonia known as ship lung. You begin to cough up a thick, gray phlegm, the color of the Atlantic fog. Your metabolic rate in this environment is abnormally high. Even when resting, your body is working to maintain its core temperature against the damp cold and to fight off the constant low-grade infections. You require approximately 3,500 calories a day to maintain your weight. But the ship's rations, the hardtack and the salt junk, provide less than 2,000, and much of that is lost to spoilage or malabsorption due to diarrhea. You are essentially eating yourself from the inside out. Your body begins to mobilize its fat stores, then its muscle tissue. Your eyes sink into your skull as the orbital fat padding is consumed. Your ribs become visible through your salt-crusted skin. You are a skeletal figure, a ghost in the machine of the Caravel. A sudden lurch of the ship sends a bucket of waste tumbling across the deck, splashing the slurry onto the very biscuits you were about to eat. By the 6th week of the voyage, the biological collapse of the crew reaches its terminal phase, the systematic failure of the human metabolism. This is not the clean, cinematic hunger of a fast. It is a brutal, technical deconstruction of your anatomy. In the 15th century, the relationship between nutrition and health is a mystery, but the physics of energy remain absolute. Your body is a heat engine, and you have run out of high-quality fuel. The salt junk you are eating has lost its protein integrity through repeated cycles of freezing and thawing in the Atlantic spray. The amino acids have degraded, and the meat is now little more than indigestible fiber. To survive, your brain triggers a hormonal cascade that shifts your metabolism into ketosis, but without adequate water to flush the resulting ketones, your blood becomes increasingly acidic. This is metabolic acidosis, a chemical shift that interferes with the ability of your hemoglobin to carry oxygen. The sensory trigger of this stage is the metallic tongue. Your mouth tastes permanently of rusted iron, a byproduct of the ketones and the bleeding of your gums. Your breath carries the scent of overripe apples, the telltale sign of your body consuming its own vital organs. The tactile reality is a profound, leaden weakness. The act of climbing the ratlins to reef a sail, a task that requires immense grip strength and core stability, becomes a mechanical impossibility. Your muscles, deprived of glycogen, begin to undergo autophagy. The body identifies the large muscle groups, the quadriceps and the latissimus dorsi, as non-essential and begins to break them down into glucose to feed the brain. As you pull on a hempen rope, you feel a sharp, sickening pop in your forearm. It is not the rope snapping. It is your own tendon tearing away from the bone, which has become brittle from a lack of calcium and vitamin D. The technical system of food preservation in the 1400s, the curing with salt and the drying of grains, completely ignores the necessity of micronutrients. You are suffering from a profound deficiency of the B vitamin complex, specifically thiamine, B1, and niacin, B3. Without thiamine, your nervous system cannot conduct electrical impulses correctly. This leads to dry beriberi. You begin to lose sensation in your feet and hands, a stocking and glove numbness. You watch your own hand grip a wooden railing, but you cannot feel the splinters or the cold. Your gait becomes ataxic, a high-stepping, stumbling walk that makes navigating a rolling deck a death sentence. One misstep, one failure of your numbed feet to find purchase on the wet oak, and the momentum of the ship's roll will hurl you against the heavy iron swivel guns. The impact doesn't just bruise, it shatters your demineralized bones like glass. The lack of niacin leads to the 3Ds, dermatitis, diarrhea, and dementia. The dermatitis manifests as the cassal collar, a ring of raw, red, scaly skin around your neck where the salt-stiffened wool of your tunic rubs. The diarrhea is constant, a violent expulsion of water and mucus that further depletes your electrolytes. But it is the dementia that is the most lethal. Your cognitive architecture begins to fragment. You experience mariner's hallucinations, seeing non-existent coastlines in the patterns of the waves or hearing voices in the whistling of the wind through the rigging. This is not a psychological break. It is a physiological failure of the neural pathways. You might find yourself stepping off the deck, convinced that the green sea of darkness is actually a solid meadow of grass. In the hold, The vermin population is also beginning to starve. The rats, having exhausted the supply of dried peas and weevil-ridden biscuit, turn to the only remaining source of protein, the crew. As you lie in a shallow, feverish sleep on the damp deck boards, you feel the sharp, needle-like prick of teeth on your toes or earlobes. The rats are testing your mortality. They are sampling you. If you do not move, if you do not have the strength to kick them away, they will begin to feed on your living tissue. The wounds they leave are jagged and contaminated with the bacteria of the bilge. Because your immune system is non-functional, these small bites do not heal. They become ulcers, deep, weeping pits that expose the white gleam of your tendons. The smell of your own decaying flesh begins to compete with the smell of the bilge. The final mechanical failure of the human body in the 15th century Atlantic is the collapse of the circulatory system. The combination of dehydration, acidosis, and malnutrition causes your blood pressure to plummet. Your heart, itself a muscle that is being consumed by autophagy, can no longer pump blood to your extremities. Your fingers and toes turn a dusky, cyanotic blue. The capillary refill time, the time it takes for color to return to your skin after being pressed, increases from 2 seconds to 10. You are cold, not just from the Atlantic wind, but from the inside out. Your core temperature drops below 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Hypothermia sets in, even in the tropical latitudes. You begin to paradoxically undress, tearing off your salt-crusted tunic as your failing brain perceives a sudden, phantom heat. Naked and shivering, you crawl toward the mainmast, your fingers scratching uselessly at the rough wood as a sudden, violent shiver racks your frame and your heart stops mid-beat. By the 8th week, the Atlantic is no longer just a geographical barrier. It has become a biological solvent. You believe your body is a permanent structure, a solid assembly of bone and muscle. This is a lethal misunderstanding. Your anatomy is held together by a microscopic biological glue called collagen, a triple helix protein that provides the tensile strength for your skin, blood vessels, and tendons. To synthesize this protein, your body requires a specific catalyst, ascorbic acid or vitamin C. Since the 15th century diet consists entirely of desiccated grains and salt-cured proteins, substances stripped of all enzymatic value, your production of collagen has ground to a total halt. You are not just sick, you are physically unraveling at a molecular level. This is the technical reality of sea scurvy, and it is a brutal, structural deconstruction of your humanity. The first mechanical sign of this failure is the appearance of petechiae, small, dark purple spots around your hair follicles. These are not rashes. They are microscopic hemorrhages where the weakened walls of your capillaries have finally burst under the pressure of your own blood. The tactile grit of scurvy-ridden gums follows. Your gingival tissue, which should be firm and pink, becomes a dark, necrotic sponge. It swells until it covers your teeth, the tissue turning a deep maroon. This is the scent of the voyage, the cloying, metallic odor of constant, low-grade internal bleeding mixed with the putrefaction of dying flesh in your mouth. The collagen that anchors your teeth into their bony sockets, the periodontal ligament, is dissolving. You can feel your molars wobbling in their seats with the flick of your tongue. Every time the ship lurches and you clench your jaw, you hear a sickening crunch as the bone grinds against the unsupported roots. The technical system of the era offers no solution, only trauma. The barber surgeon on board is not a man of science, but a technician of flesh. His primary tools are the amputation saw, the speculum oris for prying open locked jaws, and the cautery iron. In the 1400s, the prevailing medical theory is humoralism, the belief that your body is governed by 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. The surgeon observes your purple, swollen limbs and concludes you have an excess of melancholy or corrupted blood. His technical response is venesection, bloodletting. He takes a phleem, a small triangular blade, and drives it into your median cubital vein. The logic is catastrophic. He is removing the very fluid your heart is struggling to circulate, further depleting your oxygen levels and hastening your cardiac collapse. As the collagen failure continues, the mechanical integrity of your joints vanishes. Synovial membranes leak, and blood begins to pool in the spaces between your femurs and your pelvis. Your knees swell to the size of small melons, the skin stretched so tight it becomes translucent and shiny. You cannot bend your legs. The simple act of moving across the deck becomes a feat of agonizing friction as bone begins to grate directly against bone. This is where the Atlantic's physics meet your biology. Every roll of the ship sends a wave of kinetic energy through your shattered joints, causing you to scream until your throat bleeds. There is no morphine, no willow bark, no reprieve. There is only the damp oak of the deck and the relentless, salt-heavy wind. The sensory trigger of this stage is the reopening. This is perhaps the most terrifying mechanical failure of scurvy. Your body remembers every injury you have ever sustained. The scar tissue that closed a knife wound 5 years ago or fused a broken rib in your childhood is not a permanent fix. It is a temporary patch maintained by a constant supply of collagen. As that supply vanishes, the body begins to harvest the protein from old scars to feed the vital organs. You watch in horror as an old, faded white scar on your forearm begins to turn red, then purple, and then simply opens. The wound, long healed, becomes a fresh, bleeding gash. If you broke a bone years ago, the callus that fused the break dissolves. Your leg, once solid, becomes a hinge of meat and splintered calcium. You can feel the ends of your old fractures sliding past each other inside your thigh. The ship itself is a vector for this misery. The constant vibration of the hull as it hits the green sea of darkness acts as an ultrasonic hammer, further damaging your fragile tissues. The latten or brass fittings on the ship's rails are cold to the touch, and as you grip them to keep from falling, the pressure is enough to cause ecchymosis, massive, deep tissue bruising that turns your entire arm black. Your skin is now so thin that the friction of your salt-stiffened tunic causes it to slough off in sheets, leaving weeping ulcers that will never scab. You are a biological leak in a mechanical wreck. You look down at the floorboards, and as the ship takes a sudden 20-degree list to the starboard side, a loose molar finally detaches from your rotted jaw and clatters into the foul, green water of the bilge. If the reopening of old wounds does not kill you, the barber surgeon's intervention will. In the 15th century, maritime surgery is an exercise in high-stakes carpentry performed on a moving platform. The surgeon's chest is a collection of cold, wrought iron instruments. The hemostat for pinching arteries, the bone nipper for trimming jagged fragments, and the trephine for drilling into the skull to release the vapors. There is no anesthesia. To prepare you for the saw, the surgeon gives you a gag, a piece of salt-soaked leather to bite on, and 2 men to pin your shoulders against the oak mast. The sound of the era is the rhythmic, rasping shhhhhh of a rusted steel blade moving through living bone, a sound that vibrates through the entire ship's frame. The technical system of cauterization is the surgeon's only method of healing. When a limb is removed or a deep ulcer becomes gangrenous, the surgeon must seal the blood vessels to prevent you from bleeding out on the deck. He does this with pitch or boiling oil. He heats a copper pot over the galley's small charcoal fire until the liquid is smoking. He then pours the boiling, viscous substance directly into the open wound. The sensory trigger is instantaneous. The smell of searing protein and scorched hair fills the cramped hold. The tactile reality is a pain so absolute it bypasses the nervous system's ability to process it, often leading to immediate vasovagal syncope, a total loss of consciousness as your heart rate and blood pressure plummet. This medical reality is exacerbated by the total lack of sanitation in the surgeon's kit. The same saw used to remove a gangrenous toe from a sailor 3 days ago is used on your open scurvy ulcers today. It is wiped with a damp, salt-encrusted rag, but the microscopic colonies of Staphylococcus and Clostridium remain in the pits of the metal. These bacteria are introduced directly into your weakened bloodstream. Within 48 hours, you develop surgical fever. Your temperature spikes to 104 degrees. You begin to experience rigors, uncontrollable shivering so violent that your weakened tendons can actually snap under the strain. This is your body's final, desperate attempt to cook the infection out of your system. But in your dehydrated, malnourished state, it only serves to accelerate your multi-organ failure. The mechanical failure of the lungs follows. Scurvy causes pleural effusion. the leaking of fluid into the space surrounding your lungs. Every breath you take is a struggle against the weight of this internal sea. You can hear a crackling sound in your chest, like dried leaves being crushed, as the air sacs struggle to expand against the pressure. This is the death rattle of the 15th century mariner. Your blood, now thin and watery from the lack of protein, cannot carry enough oxygen to your brain. You enter a state of hypoxic euphoria. You are no longer aware of the pain in your joints or the smell of the bilge. You begin to speak to people who are not there, mothers, wives, or the shipwright who built this wooden trap. The final tactile grit of the medical experience is the salivation. Under the mistaken belief that the scurvy was a result of blockages in the humors, some 15th century surgeons would apply mercurial unguents, ointments made of mercury and fat, to the skin. Mercury is a potent neurotoxin. It causes you to produce liters of thick, metallic-tasting saliva. Your tongue swells until it fills your mouth, and your teeth, already loose from the collagen failure, begin to drop out like seeds from a rotted fruit. The mercury poisons your kidneys, turning your urine the color of dark ale. You are being cured by being systematically poisoned in a dark, rocking room while the Atlantic screams outside the hull. The surgeon, seeing that his technical interventions have failed, marks your name with a cross on the crew manifest. There is no more food for you. The rations are too precious to waste on the dying sick. You are moved to the sick bay, a dark corner of the hold where the ceiling is so low you cannot sit upright. Here, you lie in your own waste, listening to the water rushing past the hull planks just inches from your head. The wood creaks, a rhythmic, mocking sound that counts down the seconds of your life. A massive wave hits the bow, the ship groans under the hogging stress, and the surgeon, losing his balance, drops his heavy iron cautery tool into the bilge with a final, echoing splash. Death on a 15th century voyage is not an event. It is a cold, logistical process. Once your pulse ceases, a fact checked by the bosun pressing a cold thumb against your carotid artery, your transition from a crew member to excess weight is immediate. The mechanical reality of a Caravel is that it cannot afford the luxury of a corpse. A dead body in the tropical heat of the lower latitudes undergoes rapid autolysis. Within hours, the enzymes in your gut begin to digest your own tissues, producing gases that will bloat the body until it threatens to burst. In the cramped quarters of the ship, this is a biological hazard that could trigger a mutiny or a mass infection. The technical system of burial is as efficient as it is heartless. The sensory trigger of your end is the canvas. You are dragged from the hold onto the main deck, your salt-crusted skin scraping against the rough oak planks. You are wrapped in your own hammock or a piece of old, discarded sailcloth, material that is stiff with the accumulated grime and salt of the voyage. This is your shroud, to ensure that you do not float, as a floating corpse is a psychological specter that demoralizes the living. The sailmaker or his assistant performs the final technical act. He takes a heavy needle and hempen twine and sews the canvas shut. The rule of the sea dictates that the final stitch must pass through the nose of the deceased. This is a visceral test of death. If there is any spark of life left, the needle through the septum will trigger a final, reflexive twitch. You do not twitch. To provide the necessary ballast for your descent, 2 large stones from the bilge or a broken iron swivel gun ball are tucked into the folds of the canvas at your feet. The weight is essential. The Atlantic is a high-density environment. Without these weights, the gases of decomposition would eventually bring your shroud back to the surface. You are moved to the gangway, the opening in the ship's rail. There are no long orations, no moments of silence. The captain may mutter a brief Latin, in manus tuus, but his eyes are on the horizon, searching for the wind that has deserted the ship. The only sound is the flapping of the canvas in the salt spray and the rhythmic creaking of the ship's rigging. The physics of your departure are swift. 2 sailors lift the shroud, and tip it over the side. You hit the water with a dull, heavy thwack. Because of the weights at your feet, you enter the water vertically, a leaden arrow shot into the abyss. The high salinity water immediately begins to penetrate the canvas, saturating your clothes and your skin. As you sink, the hydrostatic pressure increases. Every 33 feet of depth adds another atmosphere of pressure. At 100 feet, The air remaining in your lungs and your gut is compressed to a fraction of its volume. The canvas shroud tightens around your cooling frame. The descent is silent. The light of the sun fades from blue to a deep, bruised purple, then to a total, absolute black. You are falling through the bathypelagic zone, where the temperature is a constant, bone-chilling 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Here, the laws of the surface no longer apply. The scavenger cycle begins. Deep-sea isopods and hagfish, blind and driven by chemical sensors, detect the sudden influx of protein into their desert. They do not wait for the canvas to rot. They use their rasping tongues to work through the hempen fibers. In the 15th century, your legacy is not a map or a discovery. It is a temporary spike in the caloric intake of the Atlantic's bottom feeders. Back on the ship, the quartermaster performs the final mechanical task. He takes your sea chest, if you had one, and tosses your few belongings into a pile for auction. Your spare tunic, your rusted knife, and your wooden bowl are sold to the survivors for a few copper maravedis. Your name is struck from the payroll, and your ration of worm-eaten biscuit is redistributed among the healthy. The ship continues its slow, wobbling progress across the Sargasso, its wooden hull slightly lighter, its biological load reduced by 80 kilograms. A sudden, sharp gust of wind catches the mizzen sail, the canvas snaps tight with the sound of a whip, and the ship moves forward, leaving a small, dissipating circle of foam where you once were. Navigation in the 15th century Atlantic is a mathematical hallucination. You are attempting to find a specific coordinate on a shifting, three-dimensional liquid desert using tools that are fundamentally incapable of precision. The primary technical system you rely on is dead reckoning, a process of estimating your position based on a previously determined point, or fix, and advancing that position based on your estimated speed, time, and heading. This is not science. It is a cumulative error machine. To calculate your speed, you use the chip log, a pie-shaped piece of heavy oak, weighted with lead along its curved edge so it floats vertically in the water. This chip is attached to a log line, a length of hempen rope that has been knotted at specific intervals, exactly 47 feet and 3 inches apart. As you stand at the stern, you hurl the wooden chip into the churning wake. The log reel screams as the line unspools, and you must count how many knots pass through your salt-crusted fingers in the time it takes for a 28-second sandglass to empty. The sandglass is the weak link in your temporal mechanics. In the high humidity of the mid-Atlantic, this sand, which is often actually pulverized eggshells or ground lead, absorbs moisture from the salt air. The grains clump together, increasing the friction within the narrow neck of the glass. This slows the flow of time. If the sand takes 30 seconds to fall instead of 28, your speed calculation is off by 7%. Over a 24-hour period, this minor mechanical discrepancy places you 12 miles away from your recorded position. Multiply this by 30 days of sailing through the green sea of darkness, and you are hundreds of miles off course. You are navigating toward a destination that, according to your math, should be right in front of you, but in reality, it lies behind the horizon you have already passed. The sensory trigger of this stage is the tactile burn of the log line. The hemp is impregnated with salt crystals and fine silt from the bilge, turning the rope into a flexible saw. As the ship surges forward at 8 knots, the line zips through your grip, tearing away the calluses on your palms and leaving deep, stinging rope burns that immediately become infected with the Staphylococcus bacteria endemic to the deck. You cannot let go. If the log chip is lost, the ship has no speedometer, and you are effectively blind. You record these flawed speed measurements on a traverse board, a circular piece of wood riddled with holes and pegs. There are no paper charts here. The traverse board is your only memory. For every half-hour watch, you move a peg to represent the direction the compass indicated and the speed you felt the ship was making. The physics of leeway further degrade your accuracy. A caravel, with its high stern castle and shallow keel, is highly susceptible to lateral wind pressure. Even if your bow is pointed due west, the wind is pushing the entire vessel sideways. This drift is invisible to the chip log, which only measures your forward momentum through the water. To calculate leeway, you must look at the angle of the ship's wake relative to the stern and make a guess. This is the rule of the sea. Your position is always a guess. You are factoring in the speed of the north equatorial current, which you cannot measure, and the set of the tide, which you do not understand. You are building a tower of assumptions on a foundation of shifting water. The final mechanical failure of dead reckoning is the Great Circle problem. Your 15th century understanding of geography is based on a flat plane, but you are traveling on a sphere. As you move further west, the meridians of longitude converge, but your traverse board assumes they are parallel. This geometric distortion means that the further you travel, the more your rum line, the constant compass heading you are following, becomes a spiral that leads you further and further away from your intended landfall. You believe you are sailing toward the Caribbean, but the Mercator-style logic of your era is dragging you toward the freezing, high-pressure dead zones of the North Atlantic. The quartermaster shouts a command, the sand glass is flipped for the 1000th time, and the heavy lead weight at the end of the log line snaps the hemp, disappearing forever into the black depths. If the mechanics of the surface fail you, you must look to the sky, but the heavens in the 1400s are a source of lethal optical illusions. To determine your latitude, you rely on the mariner's astrolabe, a heavy, circular plate of cast brass, often 5 inches thick and weighing several pounds. Unlike the delicate astronomical astrolabes used on land, the seagoing version is perforated with large holes to allow the Atlantic wind to pass through it without blowing the instrument out of your hands. The technical system involves the alidade, a pivoting bar with 2 sight vanes. You hang the astrolabe from your thumb and attempt to align the 2 tiny holes in the sight vanes with a celestial body, either the sun at noon or the North Star, Polaris, at night. On a rolling caravel, this is a feat of impossible physical coordination. The sensory trigger is the blinding retinal burn from the sun. To take a noon sight, you must stare toward the solar disk, trying to catch the tiny pinprick of light through the veins. There are no darkened lenses in the 15th century. After weeks of these measurements, your macula is scarred, leaving a permanent dark spot in the center of your vision. This navigator's blindness makes it even harder to see the horizon or the subtle changes in watercolor that indicate a hidden reef. You are measuring the zenith distance, the angle between the sun and the vertical, and then subtracting that from the sun's declination using a regiment of the sun, but these tables of declination are riddled with errors, based on observations made decades earlier in Lisbon or Nuremberg. The physics of parallax and atmospheric refraction are the invisible killers of your calculations. As light enters the Earth's atmosphere, it bends. When you sight Polaris near the horizon, the star appears higher than it actually is. In the 15th century, you have no mathematical formula to correct for this. A measurement error of only 2 degrees, the width of 2 fingers held at arm's length, translates to a positional error of 120 nautical miles. Furthermore, Polaris is not actually at the celestial North Pole. It rotates in a small circle around it. To get an accurate reading, you must use the guards of the Little Bear, 2 nearby stars, to determine where Polaris is in its rotation. If you take your measurement at the wrong hour, your latitude calculation is fundamentally broken. The quadrant is your secondary technical tool, a quarter circle of wood or brass with a plumb line hanging from the apex. You sight the star along one edge and wait for the weighted string to settle against a graduated scale of degrees. But the plumb line is a pendulum. As the ship hogs and sags in the Atlantic swell, the string swings wildly, never resting on a single number. You are forced to average the swing, a subjective process that introduces more human error into the machine. You are standing on a wet, unstable deck, your muscles twitching with the onset of scurvy, trying to measure a fraction of an inch on a vibrating piece of brass while the wind screams in your ears. The ultimate failure of celestial navigation in this era is the longitude problem. While you can roughly estimate your distance north or south, there is no technical method in the 1400s to determine how far west you have traveled. Longitude requires the precise measurement of time, and your clumping sandglasses are useless for this. You are sailing down the latitude, a lethal strategy where you sail north or south until you reach the desired degree and then turn west, hoping the land is where the charts say it is. But the charts are wrong. They are based on the Ptolemaic estimate of the Earth's circumference, which is 20% too small. You believe you have traveled 3,000 miles and should be seeing land, but because the Earth is larger than your math allows, you still have 800 miles of open ocean ahead of you. The sun dips below the horizon. The heavy brass astrolabe slips from your numb, salt-slicked fingers, and it hits the deck with a heavy, final thud that cracks the alidade. The final betrayal in your quest for a fixed position is the magnetic compass. In the 15th century, the compass is a primitive assembly, a magnetized iron needle balanced on a brass pin, housed in a wooden binnacle box and protected by a thin pane of horn. The needle is touched or refreshed periodically with a lodestone, a naturally magnetized piece of magnetite. This is the technical system of the directional fix. However, the needle does not point to true north. It points to magnetic north, a point in the Canadian Arctic that is constantly shifting. This discrepancy is known as magnetic variation or declination. As you sail west across the Atlantic, the gap between true north and magnetic north changes. In the mid-Atlantic, the needle might point 5, 10, or 15 degrees away from the actual pole. The sensory trigger is the rhythmic, hypnotic clink of the needle against the brass pin. You sit in the darkness of the steerage, illuminated only by a flickering lamp of stinking fish oil. The smell of the hot oil and the charred wick fills the small space, making your head swim. You watch the needle, but it is never still. The ship's own iron, the swivel guns, the anchors, the very nails in the hull, creates a local deviation. This is the iron effect. If a sailor leaves a rusted knife too close to the binnacle, the needle will swerve toward the knife rather than the pole. You are following a line that is being distorted by the very machine you are trapped in. The physics of the agonic line are the most dangerous part of the crossing. This is an invisible longitudinal line where magnetic north and true north happen to align. When you cross this line, your compass suddenly appears accurate. But as you continue west, the variation begins to increase in the opposite direction. Because 15th century mariners do not understand that variation changes with longitude, they assume the compass is malfunctioning or that sorcery is at play. You begin to correct your course for a variation that no longer exists, or you fail to correct for one that has just appeared. This creates a dogleg in your route, a curved path that consumes your remaining food and water while keeping you in the dead zone of the Sargasso. The technical rule for checking the compass is the amplitude observation. You wait for the sun to rise or set and check its position against the compass. In the 1400s, it was believed the sun always rose due east and set due west. This is a seasonal fallacy. The sun's position at the horizon changes with the time of year. Your check is as flawed as the instrument you are checking. You are trapped in a feedback loop of bad data. The rose of the winds, the 32-point card beneath the needle, is your only reality, but it is a reality disconnected from the physical geography of the planet. As the magnetic variation grows, you find yourself sailing further south than intended, pulled by the invisible magnetism into the intertropical convergence zone, the doldrums. Here, the magnetic failure meets the atmospheric failure. You are lost in a region of sudden, violent squalls and long periods of airless heat. The needle in the binnacle begins to spin or dip during electrical storms, as the lightning in the Atlantic clouds creates temporary electromagnetic fields that override the Earth's magnetism. You watch the needle spin in a slow, mocking circle, a useless piece of iron on a broken ship. You reach out to steady the compass box, but a sudden jolt of the ship throws you against the binnacle, the glass horn shatters, and the magnetized needle falls into the dark, oil-slicked crevices of the deck. When the biological and mechanical systems of the Caravel fail, the social system is the next to fracture. In the 15th century Atlantic, maritime law is not a matter of justice. It is a technical system designed to maintain the kinetic output of the crew under the threat of lethal force. This system is governed by the Consulate de Mar, a medieval code that treats you not as a human being, but as a hand, a biological lever in the ship's machinery. The moment you sign the crew manifest with a cross, you surrender your physical autonomy to the captain's commission. Discipline is the only thing preventing the 60 starving, scurvy-ridden men in the hold from consuming the remaining rations and abandoning their posts. This is a hierarchy maintained by the mechanical application of pain. The primary tool of this technical system is the Cat O' 9 Tails. This is not a simple whip. It is a multi-stranded cord of heavy hempen rope, each strand tipped with a hard knot or a small shard of lead. The physics of the whip are calculated to maximize tissue damage without immediate lethality. When the bosun delivers a stroke, the tip of the cord exceeds the speed of sound, creating a localized sonic boom that shatters the skin on impact. The sensory trigger is the wet slap of the rope against your salt-crusted back, followed immediately by the smell of iron-rich blood and the spray of copper-tasting mist. The tactile grit of the hemp fibers, impregnated with the salt of the deck, acts as an abrasive, grinding into the fascia, the connective tissue beneath your skin, and introducing the bacteria of the bilge directly into your musculature. If the whip fails to ensure compliance, the hierarchy moves to keel hauling. This is the ultimate mechanical punishment of the 1400s. You are bound with heavy ropes at your wrists and ankles, and a lead weight of 20 pounds is attached to your waist to ensure you do not float. You are then hoisted by a block and tackle and dropped over the side of the ship while it is moving. The technical goal is to drag your body underneath the keel, the very backbone of the ship, from one side to the other. The green sea of darkness is not empty. The hull of the Caravel is encrusted with Cirripedia, or acorn barnacles. These are sedentary crustaceans that secrete a calcium carbonate shell with edges as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. As you are pulled beneath the hull, the hydrostatic pressure of the Atlantic forces the air from your lungs. The tactile reality is a rhythmic, vibrating, sawing sensation as the barnacles strip the flesh from your chest, face, and thighs. You are being flayed by the ship itself. The salt water enters the open wounds under high pressure, triggering a neurogenic shock that can cause the heart to stop mid-stroke. If you survive the passage under the keel and are hauled back onto the deck, you are a mass of raw, bleeding meat. There is no medicine for you. The surgeon will simply pour a bucket of high-salinity seawater over your wounds to cleanse them, a process that causes the remaining nerves to fire in a final, agonizing cascade. The physical reality of the ship's hierarchy is expressed in the layout of the vessel. The quarterdeck is the high ground, the mechanical command center where the officers live. They are separated from you by a bulkhead of 2-inch oak and the presence of the men-at-arms, carrying loaded crossbows. The tension between the forecastle, your cramped, rotting home, and the quarterdeck is a pressure gradient that increases as the food runs out. You watch the steward carry a single, unweevilled biscuit to the captain's cabin, and the chemical signal of hunger in your brain begins to override the fear of the cord. Mutiny is not an idea. It is a biological reflex of a starving organism. You reach for a marline spike, a heavy, pointed iron tool used for splicing rope, and your fingers close around the cold, rusted metal as the bosun turns his back. A mutiny on a 15th-century caravel is a desperate gamble against the physics of the vessel. To take the ship, you must seize the steerage and the armory, the two mechanical nodes of power. But you are a crew of biological wrecks, your bones brittle from scurvy and your muscles wasted by autophagy. The men-at-arms, though fewer in number, are better fueled and better armed. The conflict is a brutal, close-quarters struggle in the dark, slippery confines of the deck. The sound of the era is the clack of a crossbow trigger followed by the thwump of a bolt burying itself in the soft, uncollagenous wood of the mast or the soft tissue of your throat. There is no room for maneuvering. It is a slaughter of centimeters. If the mutiny fails, the technical response is marooning or execution. The 15th-century maritime law provides for the ordeal of the mast. If you are identified as a ringleader, you are lashed to the mainmast with wet hempen ropes. As the tropical sun rises, the hemp dries and shrinks. This is the physics of natural fibers. As the moisture leaves the rope, the fibers tighten, increasing the tension by hundreds of pounds of force. The ropes begin to constrict your chest, preventing your ribs from expanding. This is mechanical asphyxiation. You are slowly crushed by the very material used to sail the ship. The sensory trigger is the sound of your own ribs clicking as they are forced out of their sternal attachments. The tactile reality of marooning is even more visceral. You are given a single pottle of foul water, a small bag of weevil-frass biscuits, and a rusted knife, and you are rowed to a sand key, a low-lying spit of salt-saturated sand that disappears at high tide. There is no shade, no soil, and no hope. The green sea of darkness surrounds you, a 360-degree horizon of death. The technical failure here is your own skin's inability to process the UV radiation. Within 48 hours, the actinic damage from the sun causes your skin to peel in thick, yellowed sheets. The salt spray prevents the formation of a scab. You are a living ulcer, waiting for the tide to rise and fill your lungs with the Atlantic. On the ship, the survivors are subjected to decimation. To restore the mechanical order of the crew, every 10th man is selected by lot to be executed. This is a cold, statistical application of discipline. The quartermaster reads the names from the manifest, and the selected men are hanged at the yardarm. This involves a running noose and a drop-in-stop mechanism. You are hoisted into the air by the crew, your own friends pulling the rope, until your neck snaps with the sound of a dry branch. The body is left to hang as a macabre wind vane, the weight of the corpse acting as a stabilizing ballast for the yardarm as the ship continues its wobbling progress toward the west. The final sensory trigger of the mutiny is the silence of the hold. After the violence, the surviving crew is forbidden from speaking. You work in a state of forced focus, your eyes fixed on the hempen ropes and the splintering oak. The ship is no longer a community, it is a prison machine. The smell of the blood on the deck has been scrubbed away with holy stone, a block of abrasive limestone, but the pink stains remain in the grain of the wood. You stand at the windlass, the heavy wooden drum used to raise the anchor, and as you push against the handspikes, you feel the vibration of the ship's rot through your palms. A single, bloody handprint remains on the white canvas of the lateen sail, a silent testament to the failure of the human hierarchy. The 15th century Atlantic voyage is a process of total attrition. When you look at the statistics of the era, you are looking at the wastage rate of a global machine that viewed human life as a consumable lubricant. Of the ships that left the ports of the Iberian Peninsula in the 1400s, nearly one-third never returned. This is not a failure of courage. It is a failure of engineering and biology. The Atlantic is littered with the mechanical remains of these vessels. Thousands of tons of salt-saturated oak, rusted wrought iron anchors, and the leaden ballast stones that now rest 3 miles beneath the surface. These are the only permanent records of the men who were consumed by the Mar Tenebroso. The technical legacy of this era is the wreck site. In the deep-sea environment, the lack of oxygen and the near-freezing temperatures create a state of stasis. The caravel that hogged and sagged until it sheared in half does not disappear. It becomes a chemical anomaly on the seabed. The Teredo novalis, or shipworm, which consumes wood in shallower waters, cannot survive the high pressure of the abyss. Consequently, the oak timbers remain, their cellular structures impregnated with salt and the tannins of their own decay. They are monuments to a mechanical era that overreached its own structural limits. Your body, however, has long since been reintegrated into the Atlantic's nutrient cycle. The collagen that failed you, the teeth that fell from your rotted gums, and the bones that shattered under the cat-o' nine tails are now part of the limestone sediment of the ocean floor. The sensory trigger of the final cost is the salt crust. If you visit the coastal museums where the few remaining fragments of these ships are kept, you can see the white, crystalline efflorescence blooming from the wood. This is the breath of the Atlantic. Even centuries later, the wood continues to expel the salt it absorbed during those lethal voyages. It is a tactile grit that never goes away, a reminder of the high salinity environment that dissolved the lives of thousands. The cold inventory of the era reveals that for every mile of coastline discovered, an average of 5 men died. This was the exchange rate, human carbon for geographical data. The final mechanical fact of the 1400s is the disappearance. In many cases, ships did not sink during a storm or a mutiny. They simply faded out. Without a functional compass, with a crew incapacitated by scurvy, and with a hull leaking faster than the elm tree pumps could clear, a caravel would eventually become a ghost ship. It would drift with the North Atlantic gyre, a silent, wooden tomb circling the Sargasso Sea for months until the iron sickness finally claimed the last of the bolts, and the ship disintegrated into a cloud of splintered oak. No one witnessed their end. No one recorded their last coordinates. They were simply subtracted from the world's population by the physics of the ocean. As you sit in your stable, climate-controlled reality, remember the tactile grit of the hardtack and the smell of the bilge rot. The Atlantic was not conquered by heroes. It was crossed by biological components who were subjected to a level of technical and physical brutality that is nearly impossible to quantify. The green sea of darkness remains, its chemical and kinetic properties unchanged since the 15th century. It is still a 3,000-mile-wide desert that demands a price for every passage. The final sound of the voyage is not a cheer of discovery, but the quiet, rhythmic thud of a salt-saturated timber hitting the seabed 3 miles down. The Atlantic closes over the wreck. The surface tension reestablishes its perfect, indifferent horizontal plane, and the machine is gone.